With its failure to properly test the so-called COVID-19 vaccine, the FDA lost a lot of people's trust. But this may not be the first time the FDA criminally approved a dangerous drug. The Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, along with others, have filed suit against the Food and Drug Administration regarding its approval of the abortion drug Mifeprex. Their complaint claims that the FDA violated multiple federal laws and its own regulations when it first approved the drug, then again over the next 3 decades when it expanded its use. This case has not been heard by a court yet, but I want to take some time and evaluate the specifics in the complaint to see if they pass constitutional muster. This will also give us a framework by which to evaluate the court's decision when it is published. So we'll do that next on the Constitution Study.
Neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here from the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. Teach your rising generation to be free, and I'm glad you could join me today. Yes, the abortion drugs, chemical abortions are a hot button topic, especially today when states are trying to get around the Dobbs decision when it comes to other states that don't want to allow certain abortions. But that's not my focus here today. My focus truly is the FDA and the process it uses to approve these drugs. We better understand what the law says. We better understand what they're actually doing. We can make a constitutional argument whether or not this is legal or not. So let's get into the story. The Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine's complaint is lengthy, so I will focus on the parts of the complaint I think are most relevant to our discussion today. Let's start with the very first item in the complaint. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration must protect the health, safety, and welfare of all Americans by rejecting or limiting the use of dangerous drugs. Don't you love it when a legal complaint starts with an unconstitutional assertion? Public safety is not a power delegated to the United States, and neither is regulating drug safety. Since Congress is only authorized to create laws necessary and proper to putting into execution the powers delegated to the United States, and since drug safety is not a power delegated to the United States, it is unnecessary and improper for Congress to create it by legislation. Also, according to the Supreme Court in Norton v. Shelby County, an unconstitutional act is not a law. It confers no rights, it imposes no duties, it affords no protection, it creates no office, it is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Since the act that created the FDA was unconstitutional, the FDA does not legally exist. The complaint then goes into some history of the illegal acts behind the approval of Mifeprex. Beginning in January 1993, on his second full day in office, President Bill Clinton directed his cabinet to legalize chemical abortion drugs in the United States. It appears that from the very beginning, the push for chemical abortions was more political than medical. President Clinton and his agency officials then pressured the French manufacturer of the key chemical abortion drug, Mifepristone, also known as RU46 and Mifeprex, to donate for free the U.S. patent rights of the drug to the Population Council, as its name suggests, an entity focused on population control. After receiving the patent rights to Mifepristone, the Population Council submitted a new drug application, worked closely with the Clinton FDA during the review process, and, not surprisingly, obtained the agency's approval on September 28, 2000, just over 1 month before the closely contested 2000 U.S. presidential election. So here we have political extortion to get the patent for a drug, turning it over to a politically aligned third party, and then rushing it through the approval process. Sounds like an organized crime operation to me. Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine then claims that the FDA not only had no cause to rush Mifeprex through the accelerated approval process, but doing so violated their own regulations. The only way the FDA could have approved chemical abortion drugs was to use its accelerated drug approval authority, necessitating the FDA to call pregnancy an illness and argue that these dangerous drugs provide a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing treatments. But pregnancy is not an illness, nor do chemical abortion drugs provide a therapeutic benefit over surgical abortion. In asserting these transparently false conclusions, the FDA exceeded its regulatory authority to approve the drugs. According to the FDA's own accelerated drug approval procedures, there must be reason to rush the process, and political pandering is not a valid reason. In some cases, the approval of a new drug is expedited. Accelerated approval can be applied to promising therapies that treat a serious or life-threatening condition and provide therapeutic benefit over available therapies. As the complaint points out, pregnancy is not an illness, and in the vast majority of instances, it's not life-threatening. And without a therapeutic benefit of chemical abortion over a surgical one, there was absolutely no reason for the accelerated approval process. Of course, why let the rules get in the way of a political agenda? See, at least the FDA used a scientific process to make sure Mifeprex was safe and effective, though, right? Tell me if you've heard this one before. The FDA used an accelerated process to approve a drug for something that was not a generally life-threatening illness, then failed to perform the required safety testing, all while disregarding the evidence of complications. From the complaint, we read, "What's more, the FDA needed to disavow science and the law because the FDA never studied the safety of the drugs under the labeled conditions of use, despite being required to do so by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The agency also ignored the potential impacts of the hormone-blocking regime on the developing bodies of adolescent girls in violation of the Pediatric Research and Equity Act. And the FDA disregarded the substantial evidence that chemical abortion drugs cause more complications than even surgical abortions." It seems to be a recurring theme from our friends at the Food and Drug Administration. If the FDA is using the same playbook for COVID as they did for chemical abortions, what can we expect in the future? Since then, the FDA has not followed the science, reversed course, or fixed its mistakes, all to the detriment of women and girls. Instead, the FDA has doubled down on its actions and removed the few safeguards that were in place. In March 2016, 14 years after two plaintiffs filed a citizen's petition with the FDA asking the agency to withdraw its approval of chemical abortion drugs, the FDA rejected those plaintiffs' petition despite their explanations that the agency violated federal law by approving these drugs and ignoring the substantial evidence that these drugs harm women and girls. Ignoring science, ignoring the law, and ignoring both pleas and evidence that the drug should be pulled? Yep, that sounds like the same playbook the FDA is following for COVID. The FDA would not abuse its authority for political purposes, though, would it? On the same day that the FDA rejected the citizen's petition, and mere months before another U.S. presidential election, the FDA also made major changes to the chemical abortion drug regime, eliminating crucial safeguards for pregnant women and girls. For example, the FDA extended the permissible gestational age of the baby for which a pregnant woman or girl may take the chemical abortion drugs from 7 weeks to 10 weeks. Numerous studies have demonstrated that there is an increased risk from chemical abortion drugs to pregnant women and girls as the baby's age advances from 7 weeks to 10 weeks because the surface area of the placenta as well as the size of the baby significantly grow during these 3 weeks. Wait, the FDA would change the acceptable use for an untested drug in the face of evidence of the dangers of such a move? They did that only once, though, right? Also in 2016, the FDA changed the dosage and route of administration for chemical abortion drugs, reducing the number of required in-person office visits from 3 to 1, expanded who could prescribe and administer chemical abortion drugs beyond medical doctors, and eliminated the requirement for abortionists to report non-fatal complications from chemical abortion drugs, without requiring any objective clinical investigations or studies that evaluated the safety and effectiveness of this new chemical abortion regime or any safety assessments of its effects on the developing bodies of girls under 18 years of age. Now, after all of this, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine is asking the court to do what the FDA should have done from the beginning. After 2 decades of engaging the FDA to no avail, plaintiffs now ask this court to do what the FDA was legally required to do: protect women and girls by holding unlawful, setting aside, and vacating the FDA's action to approve chemical abortion drugs and eviscerate crucial safeguards for those who undergo this dangerous drug regime. Now, what I've covered so far is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's put the constitutionality of the FDA aside and ask two very important questions that we really need to answer. First, did the FDA fulfill its mission? Well, according to its own website, the Food and Drug Administration is responsible for protecting the public health by ensuring the safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, and by ensuring the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. Did the FDA protect the public health, ensure the safety and efficacy and security of drugs and other products? Obviously, no. The FDA has shown a repeated history of not following the law or their own policies by rushing approval of drugs that have political support and not doing the safety and efficacy testing needed to determine if a drug is both safe and effective. The second question, did the FDA violate the law by these actions? The simple answer is yes. The FDA is required by U.S. law to approve a drug before it enters interstate commerce. No person shall introduce or deliver for introduction into interstate commerce any new drug unless an approval of an applicant filed pursuant to subsections B or J is effective with respect to such drug. The approval of a drug can be expedited, but only for certain situations. The Secretary shall, at the request of the sponsor of the drug, expedite the development and review of such drug if the drug is intended alone or in combination with one or more other drugs to treat a serious or life-threatening disease or condition, and preliminary clinical evidence indicates that the drug may demonstrate substantial improvement over existing therapies on one or more clinically significant endpoints, such as substantial treatment effects observed early in clinical development. Now, since pregnancy in general is not a life-threatening condition, and the accelerated approval process was not limited to life-threatening situations, this approval violated federal law. Furthermore, there appears to be no evidence that a chemical abortion is a demonstrably substantial improvement over a surgical one. In short, the Food and Drug Administration's flagrant disregard for the law and the public health they were tasked to protect shows it to be an utter failure. Add to the fact that the act that created the FDA was unconstitutional when it was passed, and what do we have? We have an illegitimate agency with an annual budget of $8.4 billion that has shown a disturbing tendency to violate the law and ignore their own regulations and policies, most likely either in pursuit of political ends or under political pressure. Based on these facts, the Food and Drug Administration should be immediately defunded, shut down, and those who violated the law or used this agency for their own political ends should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Do I expect that to happen? Well, I'd be pleasantly shocked if it did. What about Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine's lawsuit? I plan to follow this fairly closely. While justice for all the Americans who have been injured or killed by the FDA's malfeasance can never be truly attained, it would be good to see this dictatorial and despotic agency taken down a few notches. I can only hope that doing so will be a step in rescuing the American people from this bureaucratic monstrosity. I think by now you have a good understanding of my opinion of the FDA. It's a criminal, bureaucratic, illegal, immoral nightmare. And we're stuck with it. Now, we're stuck with it not because Congress passed it. That's how it got started. We're stuck with it not because we're waiting on the courts to decide whether or not to let it go. We're stuck with it because we, the people, keep hiring the employees that fund this program, that continue this program, and that have ignored their oath to support the Constitution of the United States. Does Congress have the power to regulate interstate commerce? Yes. That's not what they're doing here. They're regulating the products in interstate commerce. That's something completely different. Granted, the courts have ignored this, but then again, the courts ignore the Constitution pretty much every day anyway. I guess the important thing to understand is COVID was not the first time the FDA failed to do its duty. Constitutional or not, it was mandated to protect the public health, and it failed. It failed with Mifeprex, it's failed with COVID. what's it going to fail with next? Who knows? Because as long as it is a bureaucratic mess, as long as it is guided by political principles rather than medical and scientific ones, it will continue to do these horrible, horrendous jobs in protecting the public safety. As a citizen of the United States, why do you put up with it? Do you trust an FDA-approved drug? Do you trust a drug that the FDA failed to approve? Do you even listen to them anymore? And what can we as citizens and the states we live in do to protect us from this illegal monstrosity? Well, it starts by exposing what's going on, which hopefully this lawsuit would do. Next, it'll be working to delegitimize the FDA as far and as wide as we can. That starts at the state level and at the local level, and that's where you have to engage. Now, if you want to find out more, well, head to the website constitutionstudy.com. I've got lots of articles about how we can engage and how we can protect ourselves from the tyranny. I'm still working on my new program that will have tools for you to help you along the way. I'm working on the first module, the first part, which is the education portion. And I'm trying to set up a mini boot camp here where I live that I can record and use as training for everyone else around the country. Now, if you're interested in that, well, again, sign up for one of the mailing lists and you can be informed as this progresses. I'll announce it in the newsletter, and I will also be telling you a little bit about how it's progressing on the insider list. And pretty soon, I hope to start putting up this program on the website so you can learn more. So again, find it all there at the website constitutionstudy.com. If you want to help me develop this project, this program, well, you could donate to the cause. It would help tremendously. You can find the donate button right there at the homepage at constitutionstudy.com. But if all you can do is share this information, let other people know, hey, look at what the FDA is doing. They have done this before. Oh, by the way, there's a place you can find out more. Oh, there's some great information. Share it. Share it with friends, share it with family, share it on social media. Help other people realize we aren't subjects of the government in Washington, D.C. We are its masters. It's about time we start acting like it. And if that's something you find encouraging, well, come back here next time and bring a few friends to the Constitution Study.